Inside the cave of the gods, where a little fairy, a chubby orange kitten with fluffy fur, blue eyes, and bat-like wings, is flying on the ceiling of the cave. The king, a fluffy white cat wearing a crown, stands below, listening attentively to the little fairy. The cave is filled with shimmering light and ancient symbols on the walls. The atmosphere in the cave is mysterious and magical. The little fairy immediately begins telling the story. In a distant kingdom, there was a prince named Prince Eric. You must know that this prince was not an ordinary one. He was brave and capable in every way. Everyone in the kingdom respected him because he was the one who brought prosperity to his country. But in his heart, the prince always felt lonely. He felt like he had never truly understood the deeper meaning of life. Despite having power and wealth, the prince could never find an answer to why he was born. He would often question himself, wondering what his current success meant or if it was just a fleeting pursuit of satisfaction. One day, the prince decided to travel into the deepest forest of the kingdom to find answers about life. He wanted to discover something that could fill the emptiness in his heart. There were also legends about mysterious things in this forest that no one had ever reached safely. But the prince was never afraid of anything. He was determined to find the true meaning of life. He mounted his horse and rode deep into the forest. The landscape began to change from what he knew. Among the large trees and vines blocking his path, he noticed that those who had previously ventured into this deep forest never returned to the village. Prince Eric walked for hours. With every step, he felt like something was following him. Everything in the forest seemed quiet, yet an uncomfortable feeling lingered in the air. Amidst the silence, he began to hear whispers in the air. The sound seemed like someone was speaking to him, but he couldn't determine where it was coming from. This sensation made the prince feel like he was walking into a world that he couldn't understand. He started feeling pressure and alienation, but he refused to turn back. Finally, the prince came upon a lake that was clear and shimmering under the moonlight. The lake was covered in a light mist, and it exuded an enigmatic beauty that couldn't be explained. Suddenly, he saw the figure of a woman standing in the water. She had a graceful posture, and the light reflecting off the water made her face appear to glow. The woman in the water smiled at him, and her gaze seemed to put the prince into a trance. He felt as though he had lost himself in her eyes, which were filled with emotions he could not describe. The woman in the water spoke to the prince in a soft voice, but her words were clear in his heart. "Prince Eric, I am the one who can grant you a wish. But you must choose one of two things. You may choose pure and perfect love, or you may choose the greatest power to control everything in your kingdom." Prince Eric stood there, stunned for a moment. He thought about the love he longed for and the power he desired. Everything he wanted lay in these two choices. The woman in the water said nothing more but stood silently, waiting for the prince's decision. The prince began to feel like he was being tested in life. He thought about the power he could gain and the love he would experience. But at the same time, he felt the weight of this decision. It was as though, if he chose wrong, his life would never be the same again. The prince began to consider his options. Love was something he had always desired. To truly love someone was something he felt was missing from his life. Power, on the other hand, would allow him to rule and control everything, but he felt that power could never fill the emptiness in his heart. Finally, he still could not decide. He began to feel stress and confusion in his heart. The woman in the water said, "Prince Eric, you have until dawn to decide. If you do not choose one, you will lose something important forever." The prince felt the increasing pressure, but at the same time, he felt as though everything around him was changing. Thus, the prince began to walk away from the lake, his heart still unsure of what to choose. In the morning, the prince returned to the lake. The woman in the water was still standing in the same spot. He knew it was time to decide, but he still felt doubt and fear of making the wrong choice. Prince Eric looked at the woman and asked, "What if I make the wrong choice? If I choose power and feel lonely for the rest of my life, what should I do?" The woman in the water smiled and said, You will experience the consequences of your choice as time goes by. No matter what you choose, that choice will become a part of your life." When the prince heard this, he felt as though he had already made his choice, but he still didn't know where the future would take him. The prince chose power. Afterward, he began to rule the kingdom with the greatest power. He could make everyone in the kingdom obey his orders without question. But soon, he began to feel a loneliness in his heart, as if something important was missing. Every day as he ruled, he began to realize that having so much power didn't bring him happiness. The peace in his heart faded, and loneliness began to replace it. The prince felt a loss that could never be repaired. He wished he had chosen love instead of power. But now, he could not undo his choice. He began to wonder, if he had chosen love, how would he have felt? Would he have been happy? Prince Eric returned to the lake where he had met the woman that night. He hoped that she could give him an answer. When he reached the lake, he found that the woman was no longer there. The water in the lake had turned dark, and an eerie stillness had enveloped the area. The prince felt as though he had fallen into a world where no one understood him. He felt like he had lost everything, even the love he had once rejected. He knew he would never find an answer from anyone again. The prince returned to the castle, but in his heart, there was still no answer. It felt as though he could never go back to the past and choose what was lost. Day after day, Prince Eric faced loneliness. He felt that nothing he had could bring him happiness. The prince began to feel the true loss. He realized that power did not bring him a life full of meaning, but he could no longer turn back and make a different choice. In a dense forest at night, with soft moonlight filtering through the trees, the atmosphere is mysterious, with thick clouds partially covering the sky. A little fairy with mischievous eyes flies beside a king, who is walking thoughtfully through the woods. The fairy asks, "If it were you, what would you choose?" The little fairy listened carefully to the king's response, and when it heard the king's decision to choose love over power, the little fairy laughed loudly in an odd, childish way that it couldn't stop. "Haha, I have never heard a king criticize himself so easily," said the little fairy, with a mischievous tone in its voice.